Hey everyone, Ryan here. Just wanted to give you a little heads up before we get going that this particular episode, Kat and I are going to talk about some of our favorite horror movies. And with that, we're going to be discussing plot points and themes and things within the movie. So because of that, I wanted to give a little minor spoiler and content warning. Again, nothing major in the episode, but if we start talking about a movie and it's something that you don't particularly want to hear about or anything like that, there will be timestamps down in the show notes that'll tell you, Ryan's number 5 favorite, Kat's number 5 favorite. And the moment we say the name of the movie, if you want to skip over that, just go to that timestamp and it will get you to the next section. All right, enjoy the show.
Twice the Terror.
Welcome to Twice the Terror. I'm Ryan.
I'm Kat.
And we are your hosts. If you're unfamiliar with the show, the way that it works is that each episode we pick a topic. Each of us brings in a story or something to discuss based around that topic. And we just we just talk about it. We just talk about it. That's it. This is going swimmingly so far. It's a great intro, Ryan. Great intro. But anyway, you know what? We're just going to go with it. We're going to move forward. So what is today's episode, Kat? What are we talking about?
Well, we were going to talk about our top 5 favorite scary movies.
Yes, absolutely. So this is exciting. This is something a little different than kind of what we've done in the previous episodes. This is obviously based around, theoretically fiction, and it's like a top 5 list. But you know what? It was a lot of fun to put together, and I don't know about you, but I had a lot of trouble putting this together.
Yeah, I was going to ask you the same thing because it's so hard to pick. It's like
Yes.
It changes sometimes depending on how I'm feeling, the time of year, what my favorite movies are. So I tried to pick the ones that I come back to the most often.
Same. And I set some ground rules for myself that I'll go over here in a moment. I have hundreds, if not into the thousands of movies.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't even know where to start with this. Because like you said, it depends on the time of, the year. It depends on my mood. It depends on everything.
There's so many factors that come into it. And it's am I thinking cult horror? Because you can get
Right.
in all the different varieties of scary movies. What's your favorite slasher film, or what's your favorite psychological horror? So it was
100%.
really, really hard to pick.
Yeah, I ultimately ended up going. So the rules I set for myself were, it could only, if it was part of a franchise, I had to pick one movie from that franchise. Which, again, some of these franchises are some of my favorites, but you had to pick. It was it can't be a list of all a certain series. So I had to do that. The other one that helped me rule things out was it couldn't be a holiday themed movie. So John Carpenter's Halloween might have been on this list, but I only watched that in October. Okay. So I was like, okay, so that's coming off the list. It made it a little easier because I figured we could also do our favorite holiday themed horror movies at some point.
Yeah, that's a good idea. We could always come back and be like, what's our favorite, scary movies for Halloween, or what's our favorite, Christmas scary movies, because you can get into a lot.
There's some of my favorites are from Christmas, so 100%. I don't know about you, I did a list of, we set out to do a list of 5. But I did a list of 10 that are just my close calls. I'm not going to go over all 10. I'll list them at the end. But I don't know if you had any other close calls that almost made your list that you want to talk about.
Yeah, I have what I call my comfort horror section of the scary movies that I come to when this is what I put on a day when I'm cleaning the house, and I just can have it on in the background, and it just...
Yeah,
makes
movies
me happy.
You've seen a billion times,
Yep.
And there were certain, there's one, my number 6 and my number 5 are almost interchangeable, but I finally decided on one for number 5. Yeah, this was a tough list. And also, for anybody listening, some people are gonna... This is our opinion. like
Yeah,
putting that
yeah.
out there. Like there are going to be people being like, why, especially my list. There are movies on here where people are going to be like, why is that on your list? But
No.
we called it our list of favorite horror movies. So like you
Yeah.
said, comfort movies or movies we love. It doesn't, the quality is not necessarily like what we're looking at here. And everyone's got different opinions. So like I have movies that are technically better movies on my list, you know, that are in the 10 to 6 range than my 5 to 1 range. But some of them it's just like certain factors kind of like changed it around and stuff. So
Yeah, I feel like once I get to like 3 and 2, you're like people are gonna be like, "How did you pick this movie over this one?" I'll be like, "Listen, it's my opinion."
same 100%. And on top of that too, there's going to be people, anybody who knows me who's listening to this is gonna be a little shocked by I think some of the ordering of some of my movies. But you know what? Let's get into it. Let's just get started.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and start us off?
You want me to start off? Okay.
Yeah, are we going like 5 to 1?
Yeah, I figure I'll do 5, you do 5, and then we just go 5 to 1. So
All right.
do that. All right, my number 5 is Suspiria from 1977.
Oh, I couldn't tell by the poster in the background.
I forget that's always there. I don't know if viewers can see it, but yeah, I do have a Suspiria poster in the background. For anybody who's not familiar, Suspiria, 1977 film, Italian horror film directed by Dario Argento, co-written by him and Daria Nicolodi. I'm sorry if I butcher
Italian
anybody's
names are
names.
hard.
Yeah. And have you seen Suspiria?
I love it. And if anyone doesn't know this, the soundtrack by the Goblins, they are the same artists that did the music for Dawn of the Dead by George Romero. So again, love this movie. So I'm excited to hear it.
It's so good. I mean, it is, for anybody who doesn't know, it's hard to spoil because there's not really a plot, but it revolves around these murders that are happening at a dance school. And there's like a new student who comes in and she's kind of like figuring out everything that's going on. But really the movie to me is the reason it got my number 5 spot over my number 6 is because it is the only film I can think of that truly feels like you're in a nightmare. Like logic in this movie goes out the window. Things happen that make no sense in terms of like characters should be able to see things coming or
It's surrealism in film.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, and there is a plot, but like that goblin score combined with the beautiful but haunting and gruesome imagery of the film from Argento. Plus it's like one of his few films that feels so different. I mean, he was known for the Giallo films, you know, like basically anybody who doesn't know, they're Italian murder mysteries that were highly violent. And Suspiria is so out of that range into, like you said, the surreal and the fairy tale. Not to mention the film was it was one of the last films shot in Technicolor. So they intentionally used very bright greens and reds and everything to kind of give it like a painterly look.
Oh, I was gonna say one of the things that's so like cinematic about that movie was the cinematography and the lighting and like how he really went for strong pops of like intense color.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have a quote from him that sums it up. That says, Argento said, "We were trying to reproduce the color of Walt Disney's Snow White. It had been said from the beginning that Technicolor lacked subdued shades and without nuances like cutout cartoons." So basically he was trying to kind of reproduce that fairy tale feel in live action. So that's why it's so gorgeous to look at. And I think that's why it became, like I said, my number 5. It is such a beautiful, amazing movie that if people haven't seen it, it's one of the films I immediately show people for Italian horror because it's top tier.
The Giallo, like the whole Giallo brand of Italian film is actually one of my dad's, and my dad is the one who got me into scary movies, so it's like one of his favorite styles of horror. So if you are a horror fan and you have not heard of Giallo yet, you absolutely look into it. It's so much fun.
It's technically too, for anybody, if people want to check it out, I highly recommend Suspiria. It's not for the faint of heart. Just be aware it is pretty grisly at times. Yeah. It's over the top grisly, so again, it's on purpose to kind of be extreme in this weird nightmarish fairy tale landscape the movie's creating. Yeah. But it is pretty violent, so people be aware of that. But I also recommend the sequel Inferno from the 80s, which is also very good. The third one, not so much. It's called Mother of Tears. I don't recommend it.
Is the third ever good, though? Like,
no, especially
I can think of one exception when the third movie is better.
Really? What? I'm curious. What is it?
It's in my list, man.
Oh, okay. I can't
you'll
wait.
See.
I'm excited. Yeah. So yeah. Suspiria. I mean, I won't blabber on anymore about it, but highly recommend it. And the great thing about Italian horror too, really quick for anybody who doesn't know, you don't have to worry about like dubs or subs because the way Italian filmmakers made films was they didn't record with sound, so they just picked actors they liked. So you'd have somebody speaking Italian, somebody speaking French, somebody speaking English, and they'd all do a scene together, and then they just dub it in whatever language. So like, there's people out there that debate rages on dubs or subs. You don't have to worry about it with Italian horror. Just pick Suspiria and just watch it. It's
they did not care.
no, and that's one of the reasons that he gets such beautiful cinematography is because they didn't worry about where the mics were located.
Yeah.
So you get just amazing shots throughout most of the Italian horror films. And I will say, I mean, in looking at, I guess the two big Italian horror directors, I would say is Argento and Fulci. And I tend to lean, I think, more towards Fulci's filmmaking because I think he tends to be more fun. But in terms of Argento, you cannot go wrong with Suspiria. It is one of the greatest horror movies ever made, in my opinion. But
I fully agree.
Love it. All right.
Not on my list, but I'm gonna agree with you.
All right. So, what is your number 5?
So, my number 5 is a movie called Teeth from 2007. This is directed by Mitchell Lichtenstein. It stars Jess Wexler. She plays a young high school girl named Dawn who is an avid member of her local abstinence purity club. And she discovers that she is a modern-day living example of an ancient myth, vagina dentata. This movie, it's... okay, it covers a lot of topics for me. I mean, obviously, it covers femininity, coming of age, bodily autonomy, topics of sexism, and, trigger warning assault, things like that. The movie has gotten, a lot of mixed reviews, which is to kind of be expected for a cult film like that one. And I would kind of describe it as like a cult film. It's a smaller budget. I think it was on a budget about $2 million. But overall, critically, it was well received. Sometimes, though, if I do want like a good chuckle, I will go and read the 1-star audience reviews that are left by men, and I just sit back and laugh. I mean, that's... My personal favorite review was left on Google by a user named John Mamo, and all it said was, "I'm going to win the Powerball tomorrow night." 1-star review on the movie Teeth, and he's like, "I'm going to win the Powerball."
What?
I have no idea.
That guy, he was determined. He was like, this is the only way I can put it out into the universe that I'm going to win the Powerball is by giving a negative review to Teeth.
If I speak it, it'll happen. So I wanted to look up some like fun facts about some of the movies that I was doing, and I went on to IMDb for this one because there's really not a whole lot of information about it. Again, it's a smaller film, but it is a lot of fun. Apparently, while they were filming the opening scene of the film, some of the neighbors were protesting the film because they thought that they're actually shooting a porno. But I feel like if the neighbors knew what they were actually making, that somehow would have made it worse.
Right.
Also, this is another like fun little tidbit I found. So there is a scene. I don't want to spoil too much, but I work in a bakery full time. I am a cake decorator, and I make things out of fondant and icing. And so there is a scene in this movie where a sensitive body part that is pierced is removed from the body, and then a dog comes by and eats that body part, piercing and all. And apparently they had a local bakery custom make this piercing so that way the doggo wouldn't be hurt. And I just think that had to have been the most interesting day. So it's definitely, if you love revenge, if you love camp, because it can get pretty campy at times, I highly recommend this movie because it's intense when it needs to be. It's funny when it needs to be.
That's a great pick. That's a fantastic pick.
Thanks.
So, all right. I guess we'll move on to my number 4. All right. This is already where people are going to start to have problems with my list. My favorite film franchise of all time is Friday the 13th.
Okay.
Friday the 13th is my favorite. I find them endlessly enjoyable. I think there are better movies in other franchises. Like I said, Halloween is arguably like a better film, the John Carpenter original. However, Friday the 13th is consistently entertaining even in the worst ones. Like Jason X to me is the worst one, and I still will watch it and have a good time. Like there's nothing that tops Friday the 13th for just like putting on a movie marathon and just having a blast.
Exactly. I'm not here to yuck your yum, man. Like I'm here for it. I love a good slasher film.
Absolutely. And well, what I was going to say is I think where people are going to draw the line, because so far people are probably like, okay, he likes Friday the 13th. My pick for my number 4 favorite movie is Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. Which right there, people are turning off this podcast right there. They're like, what?
No, I'm here for the rage bait. Let's go.
Okay, I don't know if you remember this one, but obviously it's in the title. It's the one where Jason goes to Manhattan. But it's really more, at the time when it came out, it was the 8th installment in the franchise. The franchise was running out of steam at Paramount, its original home. It is... arguably, there's some really, really goofy things in the movie, like 100%. It's got some of the goofiest scenes in the franchise. The ending makes no sense, spoiler alert for anybody who cares, but it ends in the sewers of Manhattan, where it fills with toxic waste apparently every night in New York. So our heroes are like running from the toxic waste while Jason is trying to kill them.
Yeah.
Totally goofy, totally absurd. And people argue that it really should have been called Jason Takes a Cruise, because the first 2/3 of the movie take place on a cruise ship, let alone the fact that the cruise ship leaves from Crystal Lake, which...
Wait, I'm sorry. Isn't Camp Crystal Lake in New Jersey?
Yes, and it's a lake.
It's a lake. It's a landlocked body of water in New Jersey.
Yep.
And they're just like, let's take a cruise, baby. Where are we going to go? Jersey.
Pretty much. They're like, from Jersey to New York. It's because, that's what graduation classes do in, New Jersey, is they get on a cruise ship from a lake that shouldn't be able to travel into the ocean, that travels into the ocean, down to New York, which, by the way, from my understanding, like Jersey to New York, depending on where you are, is like an hour and a half. Like, it's not far.
A very long cruise. Like,
no. So it makes no sense. Not to mention, they really only shot like a day or two in Manhattan. The rest of it was shot in either Vancouver or Toronto. I don't remember which off the top of my head, but it was shot in Canada.
Checks out, yeah.
But it is such a fun movie. Like, it's goofy in the best ways. The kills are great. I like the way it's shot. It is my favorite Jason look, which is like he's been buried in the lake for years, so he's all like slimy and weird.
Mossy,
and it's not
and
like
algae. And...
Yeah, it is my favorite in the franchise. It's goofy. It's stupid. But it's so much fun. And I mean, you could say that about any of the Friday the 13th, but I feel like growing up, the ones I saw the most, for some reason, they always played 4, 5, 7, and 8 the most. I feel like you'd occasionally, like, weird choices. I don't know if they were the cheapest. Occasionally you'd see the first one and the third one, but it was very rare to see like part 2 or part 6.
TMC used to play on Halloween. They would always play those movies, and it was the same thing with Halloween. They always played Halloween 4 and 5.
Yes,
I'm like,
which
okay.
I mean, spoiler alert for the Halloween series if we ever do that, but like 4 is also one of my favorites for that reason.
It's my favorite too.
Yeah, I love part 4 in that, and so like to me it just shows like just have fun with a slasher, and that's all that matters. Like you can't jump the shark in a series where the movie before this one had a girl with telekinetic powers fighting Jason. Like, it's really hard to jump the shark even further. And so it's a lot of fun. I think there's a lot of people out there that hate part 8. It was the last of the Paramount movies before it went over to New Line. But if you don't like part 8, I recommend giving it another shot. Get some friends together, get some like snacks, just sit down and watch Jason Takes Manhattan.
And the world slashes with you. I mean,
it's true. We are the world. We are the slashers. That's the. All right. What's your number 4?
My number 4. Now this one's very popular, and I wouldn't say that a lot of the movies I picked are incredibly modern. Like, obviously, I picked a certain era that you could kind of finger on, but this is the most modern one. I picked Midsummer from 2019. It's an Ari Aster movie. It's a second feature film after Hereditary, which is also incredible in its own right. I mean, Hereditary was so creepy, but I really, really loved Midsommar for Florence Pugh's performance. Florence Pugh plays a young woman named Danny who is grieving a tragic and unexpected loss. Her boyfriend Christian, who's played by Jack Rayner, takes her with him and some college friends on a retreat to a remote village in Sweden to celebrate Midsommar. And I don't want to say anything else because Ari Aster said that he truly wants people to experience this film with no preemptive knowledge of what happens. Like, he legit said he doesn't even want people to watch the trailer. He said the best way to see it is with no idea of what's going to happen. And that's how I saw the movie, is I had a friend show it to me. I had no idea what was going to happen. Mind was blown. And now I love just showing this movie to people. I've had a couple friends get mad at me, but it's worth it.
I'm gonna. Some people are gonna be, considering I talked about how many movies I have and have seen, people are gonna be shocked to hear this. I still have not seen Midsommar. I know, and there's a reason for that. And I don't know what else is on your list, so I don't know if anything else is gonna pop up from Ari Aster. But when I watched Hereditary, I have seen so many horror movies. Hereditary is probably one of the only films that has ever gotten under my skin so much. Yeah. It stuck with me for 3 days. Like, I was just like, yeah.
That was me in Midsommar.
Yeah. And so Hereditary was so... Hereditary I recommend to everybody because it is an amazing movie. However, it is a movie I never need to watch again because it put me in such a funk for 3 days, because a lot of what the themes of that movie, dealing with guilt and trauma and things like that, are always things that, like, in horror really gets under my skin. And so that movie just really got to me. And so when I heard Midsommar dealt with similar themes of grief and anguish, I was like, you know what? I might have to wait on this one.
Yeah, take a break.
I still haven't seen it, but I've heard nothing but amazing things. And do you, out of curiosity, do you prefer the theatrical or the director's cut?
So the director's cut, there was quite a bit more in that one. I like them both, but I always prefer the director's cut of every movie. Like, I don't mind sitting there for another 20, 30 minutes. It doesn't bother me so much. But the thing what I found, like, really scary about Midsommar. Well, firstly, my husband comes from a long line of massive Swedish people. They are all 6.5 feet tall, and it's terrifying. But I was watching this movie, and I saw them, like, walk into this beautiful sunlit field, and there's all these Swedish giants. And I looked at my husband. I'm like, "This is your family reunion." I was like, "Oh my god, like, that guy looks like your uncle." I was like, so that we made a lot of jokes about that. But the thing that I found really scary about the movie was it did cover a lot of heavy themes like isolation, loneliness, grief. I don't think I'm really spoiling anything here because this scene has been memed to death. But what really changed the movie for me was the scene where Danny is crying. She's, like, sitting on the floor and she's surrounded by this, like, circle of women and she starts crying and they start crying with her. And this woman grips her shoulders and they all just start screaming in unison together. And I was like, I've never felt so seen in my life. Like, I want a group of women to scream with me. And then suddenly, as this movie's progressing on, by the end of the movie, I was like, good for her.
That's what I've heard. I've heard a lot of that it's like, it's an incredibly impactful and very empowering movie as well, which is, like, very cool. And I love that. Yeah. But it takes a lot of, like, it's a roller coaster. It takes a lot of trauma to get to that point, from what I understand in the movie.
The opening of the movie shattered me. Shattered me. So definitely pick a day to watch this when you're having a good mental health week.
That's why I've been waiting. I'm like, I got a lot of stress in my life right now. I don't need to, like, turn on a 3-hour movie where I'm like, let's feel miserable for 3 hours.
But again, like, by the end of the movie, I mean, you're just kind of sitting there like, oh my god, I'm so happy for her. Like,
yeah, absolutely. That is awesome to hear. Shall we move on to number 3?
Yeah.
So my number 3, arguably one of the most influential movies of all time. And to me, it still holds up as one of the greatest horror movies ever made. And that would be the 1999 film, The Blair Witch Project.
Yes.
I love The Blair Witch Project. Written and directed and edited by, I believe it's Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez. And you, to me, like you cannot get a better found footage movie. It's arguably the inventor of the found footage movie.
Yeah.
There are always people out there that are always like, well, what about Cannibal Holocaust? Or what about, and it's like, yes, you're right. There are other movies that have used found footage. There was a movie that came out called The Last Broadcast, I think a year before Blair Witch or something like that. But really, when it comes down to what people think of with found footage, it is Blair Witch that started.
Yeah, that was also the information age. That was internet. That was, and I think that's a huge part of how this blew up was, well, word of mouth, but this internet era, and it was the beginning of people beginning to share viral videos. I guess you could kind of describe it, and it caught on to that wave.
Yeah, the fact that the movie had people convinced at the time, and that's I think a big thing. I think a lot of people watch it now with certain expectations. And the thing about that movie is it's hard to, because it's so talked about, but it's really a movie to go into without knowing anything or without any expectations. Because the minute you start thinking oh, it's so terrifying and things like that, you're really expecting something to happen. And spoiler alert, not a lot happens in the Blair Witch, but it is the perfect amount of stuff not happening. There's no... That's what I feel like everything Blair Witch related that has come out since. There was, the both sequels, and then there was the video game that came out a while ago and stuff. They missed the point of the movie is the fact that it shows very little and yet does so much with what it doesn't show you.
You're on the edge of your seat constantly waiting for that other shoe to drop.
Yes, 100%. And it's like I said, the fact that what you were talking about, the fact that it was the information age and people were just starting to kind of really get into the internet, and that's what they used for most of their marketing and stuff. The fact that you could watch the movie, there are credits at the end of the movie. The stars of the movie went on talk shows to talk about the movie, and even still, people thought it was real.
Yeah.
People thought it was a true thing, a real movie. And I don't think any found footage movie since has ever captured that feeling of it feeling like a real bunch of like tapes and film that they just happened to find, you know?
It's like part movie, part urban legend.
Yes, 100%.
It is based, I mean, the part of the plot is an urban legend, but like the film itself then becomes like an urban legend.
And it's also a film with like a ton of layers. Like the more you watch that movie and you pick up like what some of the interview people say and everything, like most of the stuff in the movie is explained while still allowing it to kind of be ambiguous. Like if you want answers in the movie, they are there. Like it tells you what is kind of going on, but the fact that it's not explicit, you know, they don't sit down and like tell you, like spoon feed you like this is what's happening, is it supernatural, is it not, like the fact that you don't know is what makes that film so terrifying. And you know, it's one of the few found footage films I can think of where they actually had the cast filming it. Like most of the time when they do found footage now, it's like a cinematographer trying to make it look like it's somebody, you know, holding a camera, and it just never feels right.
At no point did they try like to make it seem perfect with Blair Witch, and that was a big part of it.
Yeah. And a lot, I've seen people, this is one of those arguments I've never understood. There are people out there that think it's like poorly acted, and I've never gotten that because it is some of the best, truest, most honest acting. Like it is such a shame that those actors have never really gotten their dues for that movie. They didn't make a lot of money off of it. They kind of, you know, have been just kind of like brushed under the rug when people talk about the movie. And all three of those actors are amazing. Like their performances are honest to how people would be in situations like that. There are moments you hate them and you feel for them all at the same time.
It sold it.
Yeah. It is amazing film. And I think
all performance too. Like
Yeah.
there's no real side of like special effects and stuff like that. Like it is performance driven.
and it's a film that's like a total happy accident. Originally they wanted to make it as if you remember like those documentaries they show on like Discovery Channel where they'd like show footage of like Bigfoot, but then they'd interview somebody like, this is an expert and he's gonna analyze blah blah blah. They wanted it to be more like that, so they shot a lot of footage of like that documentary stuff where they were like, we interviewed this expert who's analyzing the footage, or like we talked to the parents. And after they like premiered it, people were like, before it like made its theatrical release, people were like, cut all that stuff out. Like, you don't need that. Focus on the three filmmakers and just do that. And they took that stuff all out. They made like a mini documentary that was on the Sci-Fi Channel. It's on the DVD as well. That's all that extra footage. So it's like fun to be able to see that. But in terms of the movie itself, you don't need it. Like, it's much more unsettling and much more like horrific and impactful just being like, this is footage of these filmmakers, here it is, we laid it out for you, there you go. It doesn't feel like it's been like there's no camera trickery. It's not like found footage movies where they are like, your battery's dying, or they do editing cuts. Like, it's none of that. It's just footage of these three filmmakers out chasing this urban legend and what happens to them. It's still one of the scariest found footage movies to me ever made. It's so good.
I dig it.
All right, you're number 3.
Okay, so remember how you were like, I'm not going to pick a series? And
that was me. It didn't have to be you. It didn't have to be you.
And I was like, okay. And I'm like, but I did pick a series, and this is the one series where I feel like the third movie might actually be the best. I picked the Evil Dead trilogy.
Go on. So you picked. So you picked the whole trilogy. Then you picked Evil Dead, Evil Dead 2, and Army of Darkness.
Yes.
Okay.
The whole thing, respectively, 1981, 1987, and 1992. I don't think I really have to say a whole lot about these. I mean, anyways, consider themselves a fan of horror movies. They know how iconic Evil Dead trilogy is. I mean, Bruce Campbell.
You just got to say Bruce Campbell, and
just
everybody knows.
Bruce Campbell, man.
Yeah.
Sam Raimi was a huge inspiration to me.
Same.
Because for me, he married horror and comedy. You don't see that very much. And you don't see it as much in the first film, but by Evil Dead 2, you start to see the little jokes and jabs. And then by the time you get to Army of Darkness, I mean, Raimi and Campbell have just descended into a level of madness and I love every second of it.
Yes. 100%.
I mean, one of my favorite things to yell at people is, yo, she bitch, let's dance. Like that.
I used to have a t-shirt with that on there, and it disappeared somewhere.
Little shout out to Drag Me to Hell, which is a Sam Raimi movie that is so disgusting. Yes. But he did some Three Stooges style gags in that movie that had me rolling. And I can't think of anybody else who can do something like that. Like, who can make a horror movie reminiscent of something like vaudeville comedy
100% and still make it effective. I mean, and the Evil Dead franchise is one of those bizarre franchises where no entry in the entire series is like another entry, but it all gels together as one weird thing. You know, there's people that argue, is Evil Dead 2 a sequel or like a remake of the first or things like that, but like, putting that aside, it's like Evil Dead rolls into Evil Dead 2, which rolls into Army of Darkness. And yet if you put on any of those movies for somebody, they can kind of figure out what's going on. They don't need any like explanation. And there are people out there, I know there are people out there that love Army of Darkness and didn't even know it was part of a franchise. You know, They just thought it was its own movie.
Yeah, you can watch it and you're like, oh, I had like, and if you show them Evil Dead and they're like, what does this have to do with Army of Darkness? And you're like, dude, it doesn't matter. It's got Bruce Campbell and Deadites. Like, just sit back and enjoy. If I had to pick one, I'd probably go with Army of Darkness. But it's just Evil Dead it's one of my dad actually showed me that movie when I was 3 years old.
Oh my God. And, the first one? Evil Dead 1? Oh my.
Yeah. So I'm dead. Like, you can't affect me. Nothing gets to me. But he's like, this, he just drilled into my head like, this is such an iconic movie, you have to watch it. And I'm like, most people's parents are like, you have to see Casablanca, and my dad's like, Evil Dead. Even Stephen King, I mean, Stephen King kind of helped get that movie off the ground, not off the ground, but like, it had a little screening at Cannes Film Festival, and Stephen King went and saw it and was like, listen, this is huge. You gotta go. Like, this needs a feature release.
That franchise's influence, if you ever watch the behind the scenes stuff on Evil Dead 2, Greg Nicotero, one of the filmmakers, one of the creators of KNBFX, and a great makeup effects artist from Pittsburgh area. And he talks about when they were working on The Green Mile, which still has one of the most disturbing scenes in a movie ever to me. I cannot watch a certain scene in that movie, but that's beside the point. There's scenes where he's talking about they were talking about these contacts they wanted, and he was like, in one of the characters, and he's like, yeah, I kind of want it to look like this, kind of like white, but like you can kind of see, I can kind of like Evil Dead 2. And Greg Nicotero was like, I happen to have worked on Evil Dead 2, so I know exactly what you're talking about. Like,
Gotcha,
the
buddy.
fact that a movie like that Frank Darabont directed, like a very, prestigious Stephen King adaptation, is referencing Evil Dead 2 is just tells you right there how influential that film series is and how good it is. And if you are a horror fan and you have not watched the Evil Dead movies, what are you doing? Do yourself a favor. Watch them all.
Yeah, pop them all on, one right after another. You'll get progressively more confused, but also progressively more entertained.
That's true.
This is something important I would just want to say to anybody who's, an aspiring filmmaker. You're listening to us give our 2 cents, and I don't care. I can't do, so I talk about things. But if you want to make a movie, Sam Raimi made that movie with 13 friends in a cabin in Tennessee.
Yep.
Like, you may think you might not have the funds. You don't need funds. You do, but sometimes good old fashioned ingenuity and talent and tenacity can make something fantastic.
We live in an age now where it is easier than ever to make a movie.
It is.
You can make a movie on your iPhone now. And like, that maybe makes me sound really old, but like, it is true. Like, you could shoot a movie like Evil Dead for a fraction of the cost that they filmed it for. The first one is Sam Raimi trying to make just what he thinks an audience wants as a horror movie, and then from there on, it's kind of like what Sam Raimi wants to see from a horror movie.
He tested the waters, and now he's jumping the shark.
Yes, yeah, and there are still some, without spoiling anything, be aware there are some really dark moments in the original Evil Dead for anybody who thinks it's all lighthearted. There's some really dark stuff in that movie, but it is an amazing film, and
Hashtag never forget that we're talking about horror here.
Yes. Yeah, no, I mean, that's to be said. Obviously there's certain elements that are going to affect people in certain ways. So I would say if you have any aversions to horror, look up the movie a little bit first. Don't spoil it for yourself, but kind of see what might be in a movie, if you do have things that
certain
affect
phobias.
You. Yeah, exactly. So, okay, well, should we move on to our number 2?
Yeah.
Well, the reason I made a face when you said that is because my number 2 is Evil Dead 2.
Lol.
Yeah. Now, this is where I think people who know me might be like, what? Because for years, I have said that Evil Dead 2 is my favorite horror movie of all time. But over the years, that has shifted a little bit to where it's still one of my favorites. But there's some stuff that kind of like popped up in front of it first. And I mean, we just talked about it forever, but I love Evil Dead 2. As a kid, the reason I put this one so high, because there are days where I feel like Army of Darkness is the better movie, but Evil Dead 2 was one of the films that got me into horror through comedy. Because as a kid, it's so weird. People who know me now, they're like, what are you talking about? But it's true. As a kid, I was terrified of horror movies. I didn't want to watch them. They got under my skin, and they freaked me out and stuff. And like, there were certain ones like I'd watch. Like, one of the reasons I love Friday the 13th is I could watch those on TV, and so I could like watch them and feel like okay because it's on TV. But like popping in a horror movie, like as a kid, I remember we watched American Werewolf in London.
Let's go on.
And my parents were like, it's a comedy. And we put it on. We got to the scene with the dream sequence where like the werewolves come in and start firing Uzis at the family and stuff. And I like flipped out. Like as a kid, it freaked me out too much. But what got me into horror was horror comedies. Movies like Shaun of the Dead, and especially Evil Dead 2, because they treated horror with humor. And so you could still be scared, but you knew it was safe in a weird way, and it made it okay. And through Evil Dead 2, I was able to get into the original Evil Dead and just more horror movies and just pure horror movies and more stuff, to the point where I was the guy bringing horror movies to parties and people would look at me like, why are we watching this? I don't understand. You know, like I'd bring some crazy like Videodrome or like I'd be the guy
kids,
like,
you want to watch They Live?
Right, exactly. Like bring weird stuff and people are like, what is going on? But that all came about because of Evil Dead 2. I had a friend who was really into horror. He was like, you should watch Evil Dead 2. Watched it and just like loved that movie. Again, everything we already talked about it in detail, but the splat stick element of it, the fact that it combines horror and humor, it can be creepy in one moment and ridiculous, you know, and even the moments that are like gory are so over the top in that movie with like gallons of blood and just like insanity. And it's just, in terms of talking about like, if you're looking to be an aspiring filmmaker, that film is hugely influential to see a director's style come through.
Yeah.
You know,
definitely look up Sam Raimi look at the first few films that some horror directors, I mean, even John Carpenter, like you'll find your
Peter
voice.
Jackson. Like watch Peter Jackson's first couple of movies. Like Dead Alive is one of my favorite.
That's like, okay, that's one of my honorable mentions. Okay.
I love Dead Alive. Like there is not a movie that is I don't think has ever topped the amount of gore and violence in that movie, and yet it's hysterical the entire time.
Zombie kung fu fighting priest who yells, I kick ass for the Lord.
Or the lawnmower scene with Party's Over, and he's just like, So Splatstick, like, and that movie was influenced by Evil Dead 2. Like, you don't get to Dead Alive without Evil Dead 2. The only reason I feel like it's dropped out of
mainstream,
well, I was gonna say dropped out of my number one spot.
Oh, okay.
Is just because, like I said, I think there's a movie that tops it in pure insanity. That is the same kind of like tone, but is even more absurd.
I'm excited.
And so that's the only reason Evil Dead 2 is not number one. I love Evil Dead 2 still. I love all three of the films, but to me, Evil Dead 2 strikes that balance the best. And Army of Darkness is just like, you know, Evil Dead 1 is pure horror. Evil Dead 2 is this weird horror comedy hybrid. And then Army of Darkness is just pure fun, thrilling, you know, old school swashbuckling film.
Yeah. You could look at these movies as being like three kids. Like you have the eldest, the middle child, and then the baby of the family who's just like, there's no rules.
Exactly. Yeah. All right.
My number two. So some people may not necessarily think this is a horror film, but I think it meets all the criteria for me. So my number two was almost my number one, but my number two is the 1996 classic. I'm going to say classic, The Craft.
The Craft. Okay.
I'm obsessed with The Craft. It stars Robin Tunney, Fairuza Balk, Nev Campbell, Rachel True. For anyone who hasn't seen it, the movie stars Robin Tunney as Sarah, a high school girl who moves to Los Angeles and becomes friends with three witches at her school. And they discover that Sarah has telekinetic powers. They form a coven, and soon these girls end up on a wild power trip. So this is a fun fact about the movie. So they had a Wiccan consultant on set named Pat Devon, who was just to make sure that they weren't going to do anything that was going to potentially offend practicing pagans or Wiccans. But also Fairuza Balk did her own side research. So she went to a local occult shop in LA and asked the owners a few questions. And she said that they were like the loveliest people. They're extremely helpful, had a near encyclopedic knowledge of this stuff. And she found out that the store was going to close and they were going to turn it into a restaurant. She's like, well, I can't let that happen. So she bought the store, fixed it up, and, you know, basically saved one of the oldest occult shops in the country. So thank you very much, Fruza Bulk, for, keeping up the culture. Even though the god in the movie Menel is made up, everything else that they do in the movie is pretty accurate to Wicca, from what I understand. So they did a really good job as far as that goes in their research. Why I love this movie, it is absolutely like one of my comfort movies. Like, I can put this movie on a rainy day with a cup of tea and I'm just like, I'm at peace with life. It's not so much that it's terrifying or anything really like that. I love the message of the movie about, finding power within yourself, having friends who encourage your power, the sense of community. But the part that scared me was the vulnerability aspect. You're exposing yourself to other people and you run the risk of them taking advantage of that and using that against you. So, having friends turn against you and use these things that you've revealed to them in confidence being weaponized, that's the scary part, it's
right.
Can you really trust these people? There's also the element of being so absorbed in revenge that you just lose total control of yourself. I love a good female villain. For me, the overall theme would be ultimate power corrupts, and Nancy is a great example of that. That being said, I don't think Nancy did anything wrong. Okay, if you haven't seen this movie, I'm sorry, I will spoil this, but when she throws Steve Ulrich out the window, I was just like, I love that for her.
You know what's funny is I saw The Craft for the first time a few years ago because it's one of my wife's favorites. And she was like, we gotta watch The Craft. We gotta watch The Craft. I was like, okay. We watched it. And I had a lot of fun with it. If you're looking for like a good 90s nostalgia fix, like The Craft is that. Yeah, I mean, that's the best way I can put it. It's just a lot of fun.
Soundtrack.
Yeah, it's got a good soundtrack too.
If it weren't for that movie, Silver Raven Wolf would not have sold as many books. Like,
right.
All the girls who were like, I'm a witch now. If you took the Spice Girls and you just gave them punk jackets, that is The Craft. It is.
You're not wrong. That's absolutely. Yeah. Highly. Now, did you see? I did not see it. Did you see the sequel, the Legacy sequel they did a few years ago?
No, in a way, like, I kind of didn't want the movie to get ruined, if that sounds bad, but sometimes I don't want to watch sequels if I'm afraid they're not going to live up to my expectations.
There's a few on my list that are on there that are not higher up because of that reason, because the sequels have kind of like tarnished them. So yeah. But yeah, anybody out there looking for something fun, some of these films have been a little darker on our list and stuff. And if you're looking for something really kind of like fun and light for the most part, and just like I said, a 90s nostalgia bomb, watch The Craft. It's a lot of fun. It's cool.
Show it to your teenage daughter and don't ask questions when she asks for dried herbs. Just let it happen.
Exactly. All right. So, do we want to do our close calls or do we want to do our number one picks? What do you feel?
Yeah, let's do some close calls.
Okay.
I think we mentioned a few throughout this. What were some of yours?
So some of mine that I have on here, my number 6 spot, which was the one that could have flip-flopped with Suspiria, depending on how I was feeling, is Hellraiser, the original Hellraiser film.
Ooh, Hellraiser, yeah.
Written and directed by Clive Barker, based on his novella, The Hellbound Heart. It's a fantastic film. It's unsettling. It was boundary pushing at the time, and it's just like, it's villains are not what you think. It's not the quote unquote monsters in the movie. It's the human beings in the film and how horrible people are. And like the Cenobites in the movie that people associate it with being bad guys are more just kind of like, yeah, this is our job. This is what we do. Like,
they're just manifestations of the human condition. Like...
Right. Exactly. So, and the only thing that held Hellraiser back for me was the fact that after the second one, the sequels really go downhill. Yeah. Hellraiser and Hellbound, Hellraiser 2 are both great in my opinion. 3 is okay, and then they just become terrible. And they start making Pinhead like the villain and like make him more like say cheesy lines. They tried to turn him into like Freddy Krueger, and then some of the movies were just they were made to like keep the franchise because otherwise they would have lost the rights. And honestly, even I know a lot of people really liked this kind of reboot one that came out last year, I think, from Hulu. Even that I was kind of like lukewarm on. I don't think anything has ever topped that original film in terms of it just being like just kind of disturbing, and just awesome. So Hellraiser. A couple other films I have on here. My number 10 was Exorcist 3.
Okay, no, all right, I'm gonna yuck your yum now. I'm
No.
sorry. What?
Have you seen Exorcist 3?
No, because I know it sucks. Okay, no,
No.
I'm-
I'm going to tell you right now. All right, this is what you're going to do. You're going to go rent Exorcist 3.
all right.
Or we're going to watch Exorcist 3 or something.
I'm gonna go dig up a Blockbuster.
Exorcist 2 is terrible.
Oh yeah, no, that one's
It's one of the worst horror movies ever made.
That's
if
why I
not
didn't
one of the
watch
worst.
Exorcist 3. It was because of Exorcist 2.
Exorcist 3, however, was written and directed by William Peter Blatty, who wrote the original Exorcist book and wrote the book that this movie's based off of that was a follow-up to The Exorcist called Legion. And it is so good. It was overlooked exactly because when it came out because of Exorcist 2. Because Exorcist 2 is such a turkey and it's so bad.
You got me, all right.
Yeah. People overlooked it. But Exorcist 3, the only thing that holds Exorcist 3 back from being great is in the theatrical cut of the film, which is the best version to watch because the director's cut kind of uses like weird raw VHS footage and it's not like well put together and stuff. But in the theatrical cut, the studio demanded some reshoots because they're like, it's not Exorcist enough. So they insert kind of like this small subplot dealing with like an exorcist like coming from Rome, and it's minor, so it's not that big a deal. But it has one of the greatest performances by Brad Dourif ever. It is unsettling. The dialogue in it is so good, and it's really subtle. Like it's a movie that for the most part, until the ending then goes a little bonkers, but like it's a lot more subtle. Plus, it's got one of the greatest jump scares ever put on film. Like, not a cheap jump scare. We're not talking like about a Conjuring film, jump scare. We're talking about like solid like 10-minute build up to this jump scare.
I'll give it a whirl. I'll try it. All right.
Yeah, watch Exorcist 3. Number 9, Night of the Living Dead.
Oh yeah.
Night of the Living Dead's amazing. Like there's nothing. What more can you say about it? It's one of the most influential movies of all time. We wouldn't have zombies.
I 100% agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah. We got to represent Pittsburgh as well. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Made in this area.
My copy of Night of the Living Dead is signed by both Barbara and Johnny.
Really? That's cool.
Yeah. So, and also Johnny doesn't live that far from me, apparently. Like.
Yeah, a lot of them still live around here. I mean, John Russo is still in this area. He co-wrote the film. Later went on to create Return of the Living Dead, which is also fantastic. But yeah, no, you really can't get much better than Night of the Living Dead. It's a class. I mean, the only reason it's not higher on my list is because I feel like I said, I think Day is a little bit more watchable, and it is a film that like I respect and love, but I will probably put Dawn or Day on before I put Night on normally. But yeah, that's it. Number 8. I have a lot of sequels. I don't know why. My number 8 was Phantasm 2. Phantasm is fantastic for anybody who doesn't know. Written and directed by Don Coscarelli. He wrote and like helped with all of them until 5. I think 5 he was just producer on. But weird franchise, very surreal again, dealing with, this tall mortician, mortuary guy. They call him the Tall Man. He's got these flying silver spheres that drill into people's heads and stuff. Yeah. And it's a surreal franchise. You don't know whether it's a dream or whether it's, real, what's going on. But the reason I like 2 the most is it's just, to me, the best paced. It's the most fun. It's kind of, I hate to say streamlined because the first film is so creative, but they definitely were working with a bigger budget. And so because of that, they kind of had to like make it a little bit more accessible to general audiences because it was released by Universal. But God, it's a lot of fun. You get like the invention of like the 4-barrel shotgun in that movie. And like, if you're a fan of, which I'm not personally, but I know there's a huge fan base out there for Supernatural. The TV show, not my cup of tea, but like that's okay. But that said, if you're a Supernatural fan, you owe a lot to Phantasm 2 because them driving around in the CUDA and like the weapons that they use and everything, a lot of that comes from Phantasm 2.
Yeah, I think okay. So you mentioned a couple that I would definitely throw in there, like Return of the Living Dead. Mm-hmm. That is such an amazing movie, and I absolutely love the story. I love the characters. They're so fun.
Yes.
It's such a fun movie. And the gore, and like, no, it's not gore, not just like blood always just spraying everywhere. Some of the gore is like a little more on the subtle side.
Yeah.
Like them describing a person feeling what it's like to go into rigor mortis. I also really love Scream. Scream is so it's again, I'd call it a classic. I'm obsessed with Matthew Lillard. Matthew Lillard is probably my favorite murderer I've ever seen in a movie, and I always think of, you hit me with the phone, you dick.
His performance in that movie is something. He's on a whole different level than everyone else. Like, I don't know what he's doing half the time, but it's so fun to watch, and it's still super effective. There's some wonky effects in that movie that I've always kind of been like, man, that's a bad effect, which I don't understand because it's K and B. But that spoiler alert for if you've never seen the original Scream, that head crush scene in the garage always looks so bad to me, and I don't know what it is about it, but it's
the Rose McGowan doll.
Yeah, yes, it's so rubbery and bad looking, and I'm like, why is the effect in this so bad? But that being said, the rest of that movie is so good. Scream holds up really well.
Yeah, Neve Campbell's iconic. It's great. Courtney Cox is hilarious, and so is David Arquette. I mean, it was a good little movie, and I like watching it when I'm cleaning the house. Another almost there one for me, this will be my last one, is The Shining.
I was literally about to say my number 7 on this list is The Shining.
Yes, okay.
I love The Shining. Again, like, what's left to say about The Shining? Everybody loves The Shining. It's an amazing horror film. I honestly think the reason it's not higher on my list is because of how much, and it's going to sound super hipstery, like, I liked The Shining before it was cool, but like, the amount of analyzing that has gone on for The Shining is absurd. Like, the theories, there's that whole documentary. I always get it confused because in the book, the room number is different in the movie.
I'm going to Google it real quick.
Okay.
Room 237.
Oh, it's 237. Yes. Room 237. It's the amount of people who have overanalyzed that movie and been like, what was Kubrick really saying with The Shining? It's like, he was saying he was making a movie. It wasn't him trying to fake the moon landing, or it wasn't him trying to like
He triggered people.
I know, and people are out there, and this is just my opinion, and I do love when films have discourse. Like, I like people to talk about movies, whether you like them, whether you don't, what your theories are. That's why we have cinema. But I think The Shining has been taken too far from just being a great kind of ambiguous, creepy horror film to people being like, it's the greatest thing ever created, and, you know, Kubrick was really meaning this, and like, do you watch the film in 16:9 or his 4:3, which it's like, just, and not to mention,
did you see the helicopter in the beginning sequence? Like, dude, shut
it
up.
Was a mistake. Like, people are like, Kubrick didn't make mistakes, and it's like, yes, he did, because
everyone
that
makes
helicopter's
mistakes.
not there in the 16:9 version because he framed it for that.
It wasn't supposed to be shown in 16:9. It was meant for television. It's like, shut up.
All right, well, that's all our close calls.
No, the numero uno.
Numero uno. Do you want to go first?
Sure. Okay, so this one, I know you know a lot about this one. So it's a big one. My favorite, my number one, is the 1991 classic Silence of the Lambs.
Oh, it's such a great movie.
This is one of very few films, one of only 3 that has ever won the Big 5 at the Oscars. And for anyone who doesn't know what that is, that means it won Best Picture, Director, Actor, Actress, and Screenplay. Only 3 films have done this before. Silence of the Lambs is the only horror film. So that's major. One thing that I wanted to point out, that a couple like interesting facts about the movie. I don't know. Let me know if you know any of these. But so the director, Jonathan Demme, originally didn't want Jodie Foster to play Clarice Sterling because he wasn't very impressed with her performance in The Accused, even though she won an Oscar for it. But he wasn't impressed with her performance because he didn't like her Boston accent. So, but she did inevitably get the part, as we all know. And when she was filming that scene where she's interviewing Hannibal Lecter, kind of early on, he stops and makes a comment. He says, "That accent you tried so hard to shed, pure West Virginia, that was ad-libbed." And it completely, like, it leveled her. she said later on in an interview, I can't think of anything more hurtful than somebody standing there saying, I feel sorry for you. You're really pathetic. And it's like, it upset her so much. And I was like, that is such a big part of the movie for me, is that it's not just the serial killer and all this stuff. It was the way that Hannibal Lecter could just pick you apart in minutes just from looking at you. And it's like, oh, it's just like someone's like in your brain, and it stresses me out.
And what a I mean, all of those performances, Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter, Jodie Foster, and like Ted Levine as Buffalo Bill, like they've all become so iconic from that movie.
Also, Ted Levine is from Bel Air, Ohio.
Is he really?
Yeah, so it's only about 40 minutes south of where I grew up. So the Buffalo Bill scenes were filmed. Some of the scenes, at least the house scene, was filmed in Bel Air, Ohio. And he actually recognized the street that they were on, because he's like, this is like an old childhood friend's neighborhood. Like her house is like catty corner to this, like right next door. So I thought that was really interesting, because they're talking about this dirty little Appalachia town, and I'm like, oh, hey, it's me. As I mentioned before, as far as gore goes, I do like being a little bit disgusted, but like, and I'm not thoroughly impressed with just like an overabundance of squibs or anything like that. So it was just, for me, the things that like really got me were the way that the people were killed. Like, if you haven't seen Silence of the Lambs at this point, like, I'm sorry, honey.
Right.
But when Hannibal flays that guard and like poses him like a butterfly in the cage, or the moth in the cage, and I was like, and again, I saw this movie at an inappropriately young age. I was just sitting there like gripping the armchair, like freaking out.
When violence happens in that movie, it's very unsettling, and a lot of times it's stuff you don't even see. Like there's like aftermath stuff. That scene where he's like sewing the skin suit together and stuff is just like, oh, it's so much more impactful than like.
You ever been able to like smell a house through a screen?
Oh yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, 100%. Like, God, what Buffalo Bill's house smells like, and it is not great. All right, so moving on to my number one.
Yeah.
All right, I talked about it. I talked about Evil Dead 2. Its seat has been overtaken by a film over the years that I found to be even more insane. On the same level, from another famous filmmaker. And I'm going to get so much guff for this, but you know what? I don't care. My number one pick is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2.
You are a sequel queen. Okay.
Apparently so, and I didn't realize it until I put this list together. Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, to me, is arguably one of the greatest, most fun, bizarre... The only way you can describe that movie is bananas. It is just pure insanity. Obviously, it's directed by Tobe Hooper, who co-wrote and directed the original film, the 1977 film, 1974 film, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And when this film came around, he was working for Canon, which there's I can't remember the name of it. I think it's called like Electric Boogaloo. But there's a great documentary on Canon Films if you want to see just the insanity of Canon Films in the 80s. But he was working for Canon, and they wanted him to kind of like make another Texas Chainsaw. And so he wanted to just up it. So he hired a guy named L.M. Kit Carson to write it. And it is basically what you take if you take the original film, up it to 11, and just emphasize all the dark comedy that's in that original Texas Chainsaw Massacre film.
Now you mentioning it, like, I gotta do a rewatch, because I think when I first saw it, I think I was probably like in middle school, somewhere around that age. And I kind of remember there being a lot of parts where I was just like, what is happening right now?
Right. And it's got... that's exactly it. Like, it is, and I think a lot of people felt that way in the 80s, because it came out in 86, so we're talking 12 years after the original film. That original film was so notorious for feeling so gritty and dirty and gross, even though you don't see a lot of stuff. It's not a super violent movie, the original one. Like, anytime there's violence, they kind of cut away from it. There's not a lot of blood or anything. People think they see more than they actually do. The second film is not like that. The second film is like got effects by Tom Savini.
Tom Savini,
Pittsburgh legend. I love Tom Savini. So he's got. I've got a signed poster of Texas Chainsaw 2 with his signature on there over there, as well as Bill Johnson,
nice.
who was a Leatherface in this film and stuff. Like, I love this movie. It is everything about 80s excess in films put into a movie. And also, like I said, there is a lot of dark comedy in that original film, but people didn't pick up on it because that film is so kind of like unsettling that like people missed. There's like the moments where like in the original film where the cook comes in and he's like, look what your brother did to the door, and like the door, and it's just like, it's hilarious, but people were unsettled. So they took that stuff and they were just like, all right, let's make this extreme then. And so it's
Crank it up.
hilarious. Like, the dialogue is just so chewable. Like it's just you've got Bill Moseley playing Chop Top, who's kind of like the hitchhiker in the first
Bill
one.
Moseley. I remember Bill Moseley. Okay, yeah, he's great.
Bill
enjoy
Moseley's
him.
so good, and I love that performance. He's just insane. Dennis Hopper gives one of his best performances as
oh my God,
Lefty
yeah,
Enright, who by the second half of the movie basically screams every single line that he has. There's a chainsaw fight in it. It is just...
I remember the chainsaw fight.
So much fun. I mean, I wrote down, because of this movie, I quote this movie all the time. You have lines like when somebody asks Dennis Hopper, Lefty, about like some of the first victims, and they was like, yeah, just some boys going crazy. And he goes, oh yeah, one of those boys was so crazy he sawed his own head off going 90 miles per hour. Like, just like, or there's a line where like this guy just goes, oh my aching banana. Or like, even better is when Lefty confronts the cook at one point, and the cook asks him who he goes. He goes, I'm the Lord of the Harvest. And Drayton is the name of the cook in the movie. And he goes, what's that? Some new health food bunch? Like, there's just so many good lines in that movie. And it's so funny and yet also demented. Like, it is pure insanity. And like, while the first film does devolve...
Why am I picturing a Nutri-Grain bar? This is the Lord of the Harvest.
they missed out on marketing that with Dennis Hopper's face on it, dressed as Lefty with his like giant like cowboy hat that he wears throughout the whole movie. And it's like the ending follows closely to the original film, but also kind of like pokes fun at it. And just like, it is, to me, I tell people who have never seen Texas Chainsaw 2, I go, this movie is bananas. And I put it in, and by the end of the movie, people typically go, you were 100% correct. I don't know how to describe that movie other than bananas, because that's all it is. It is pure insanity. It's pure chaos.
I'm sent. That's so funny. I'm going to be thinking, oh my aching banana.
Oh my aching banana. Like, it's just such a good line. And like there's other ones. I mean, all of Chop Top's lines are great. The set design in the movie is like amazing, especially when they get to kind of like their lair. It's this beautiful like abandoned amusement park. It's just so much fun. And I think a lot of people overlooked it when it came out because it wasn't like the original film. And a lot of people still kind of go, yeah, but it's not Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And it's like, yeah, that's true. It's not. If you're looking at like what's a more, kind of like realistic, gritty film, definitely Texas Chainsaw Massacre is amazing. It's an amazing movie. But in terms of pure enjoyment, I will watch Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 over the first one any day of the week. I love that movie.
That's fair. So, I mean, yeah. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, the point is to be entertained,
Absolutely.
Did this movie spark joy? And we've named many movies that have sparked joy for us.
Yes, 100%. And I think that right there is our list. We gave you some really good movies if people out there haven't seen them and want to check them out. On the YouTube channel where you can leave a comment, if you're watching this via video and not on one of the audio versions, leave a comment. What is your favorite horror movie? Like, we'd love to hear other people's recommendations.
Absolutely.
And maybe we'll talk about it one day. Maybe we'll make a list of like viewers' favorites or something. Because I think that'd be a blast. There's so many good movies out there. This is just the tip of the iceberg. And who knows? Maybe we revisit this at some point and our thoughts have changed. You never know. But for now, I think for this episode, we should probably wrap it up. Kat, do you want to close us out?
Yeah, well, you just heard our top 5 favorite horror films. Like Ryan mentioned, let us know down below in the comments anything you want to hear from us in the future. Maybe we could do like our top 5 favorite Halloween movies, our top 5 favorite movies from certain directors, or maybe we could even do a list of 5 horror movies we don't recommend if we want to get a little spicy with the content.
That's a good idea.
Thank you so much again for listening to us talk at you. We also do a lot of content like this online, so just check us out, give us a follow on YouTube and wherever else you like to listen.
All right, everybody. Until next time.
Until next time.